So Ori made the point during the discussion that Carolyn Elkins has done a lot of work on the Mau Mau and the British tactics to suppress the Mau Mau Kenyan Land of Freedom movement. But he mentioned also that she had published this article about specifically about the archival work. And I did go grab it and read it, and it makes many powerful points. I just want to highlight a couple of things here. So it's called Looking Beyond Mau Mau, Archiving Violence in the Era of Decolonization. Out the gate, when asked to reflect upon the era of British decolonization, the archives that documented, I'm drawn to images of ash and fragments and the ability to of post-imperial landscapes and those who till them to conceal as much as they reveal. From India to Kenya, a dark cloud literally hung over Britain's imperial retreat. The smoke from burning documents threatened to interrupt Independence Day ceremonies and betray the hastened Anglo efforts to sanitize the past and lay claim to the future. And I made a note here. This is why I don't like museums. I see museums as doing exactly what Elkins is saying here about archives. The warehouse for Britain's end of empire files reflects and reinforces the contents of the documents themselves. From the carefully managed files, a sense emerges of a coherent decolonization process, and one that adhered to and imparted the rule of law, just as the colonial administrators and archivists in London adhered and still adhere to the rules of document preservation. In other words, as I understand it, that museums, much like archives, are curated political memories meant to frame a past and a present, all in service of that same imperial process. Archives are loaded sites that produce realities as much as they document them. And as she points out, a lot of what has been written about British Empire has largely been devoid of archival skepticism. This came up when we were doing the response to Marable's Malcolm X. That how much weight do you put on the archives of Black liberation compiled by the FBI? It was an imperial story, in Drayton's words, that allowed Britain to escape the scene of the crime. That's what the archives at Kew, the British National Archives, Kew Gardens. The power of the archive shaped the ways in which the future understood the British imperial past for decades. Indeed, of the official mind reflected that which the archives beckoned us not only to remember, but also to forget. And this is why I think, as I noted here, why we need not avoid pop cultural or academic criticism. Because I would argue that pop culture and pop academic productive work is itself part of what is being described here as the process of preserving colonial memories and versions of events, or the cover the escape the scene of, as they escape the scene of the crime. The power of the archive shaped the ways in which the future understood British imperial past for decades. So when I'm complaining about, Padil Joseph and whoever else, their impact on Netflix documentaries and Hulu, Disney products about Malcolm and whoever else are become part of this process. They become part of how the future understands these histories and struggles. She's talking about some survivors of the struggle in Kenya who wanted to get reparations. This article is fascinating. I'm not doing it justice. That she goes into how the archives helped. How challenging the archives, and she and a colleague doing a variety of different forms of research in books called Imperial Reckoning, which is hers, and History of the Hanged, which is her colleagues, help excavate a lot of the research that would help some of these folks get reparations to a certain extent. Not unlike other reparations cases, the juridification of the past put history on trial. As with other cases of restorative justice over the last several decades, rules of disclosure produced considerable new historical evidence. In this instance, legal discovery brought to light thousands of new end of empire documents that will drive a new era of research on British decolonization and compel the field to examine closely the ways in which British colonial archive is derivative and reflective of the colonial state itself, and as a means by which the state, both at the time of empire and thereafter, exercised its power and affirmed its fictions. Oof. Mm. In filing their case, the five elderly claimants from Kenya's rural highlands managed to stir the strategic amnesia of the British colonial government and its archives. I mean, just a lot of talking about some of the files that were removed and what to think of the files that remained. That is, to what degree were abuse and destruction of life and property part of a calculated and systematic British counterinsurgency policy in Kenya? And to what degree were colonial officials in London acting in right of Britain implicated in these acts? It is here that the documents contained in the Henslope disclosure shed important light onto not only the nature of the systematic violence at the end of empire, but also the degree to which the colonial state in London, including those not limited to the colonial office, has been complicit in the selective process of how the past has been documented and remembered. Oh man, and she talks about this guy who was involved in the colonial abuse of Mau Mau and Kenyan people, and then became part of the colonial office that helped develop the archives of that abuse. So I mean, it's this Gavagan dude was now rendering documents to ash and colonial incinerators while ensuring that others would be permanently held under lock and key. This was somebody who had developed one of these interrogation techniques that uh, uh, the dilution method, I think they called it, that basically abuse people sometimes to death, and then he's also in charge of determining what would be remembered and how it would be remembered. The sensitivity culling that was and again, if, I've done some research at the National Archives not far from here in Maryland, and this comes up, the sensitivity culling, like what you get is what is left after they've decided what should be left is available to you. Yeah, there's a lot here. This was a fascinating read. I encourage people to check this out. Also, is if to the I mean, there's always a lot of great stuff to check out. Um, in what ways is the orchestration of systematic violence to personhood and documents connected to the morphing of individuals such as Terence Gavagan from chief torturer to decorated archivist? Empiricism, the lifeblood. So this is interesting. When the article ends, she's asking this question of American Historical Review, June 2015. My bad. There's the full citation. So 2015 American Historical Review. Empiricism. So she's talking about the field of history and its limitations in doing historical work. And I thought this was a really good part. This was a really nice self-reflection about the field she's in. But she says here, empiricism, the lifeblood of our profession, cannot resurrect which colonial incinerators have left to the historical imagination. Empiricism, the lifeblood of our profession, cannot resurrect that which colonial incinerators have left to the historical imagination. Critical theorists and anthropologists have long informed the recovery of histories in the face of colonial archives that shape their own versions of the past. Recovering consciousness and memory, probing the classification and collection of colonial knowledge and the destabilizing colonial boundaries and control using the lens of mimicry, question colonial power and its structures while simultaneously critiquing them. And then citing some of her colleagues, she's asking about this question: what becomes of historiography when it's hitched directly to restorative justice? And as I interpret it, what does it mean then to be writing about these histories if there's a decidedly political connection to them? It can't be some apolitical, disconnected. It's not an apolitical, disconnected project anymore. It's part of a process that would be in many ways determine how the state is remembered and imagined, and to what extent it has to offer up restorative justice. But I like this question though, or this point raised here that's saying, look, we need an interdisciplinary approach. And I remember, when Fanon talked about I don't do disciplines; those are for botanists. But this question: who organized the colonial violence? I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.